Gerald A. Griggs is an Atlanta trial attorney, the 13th president of the state conference of the Georgia NAACP. He's also the president of Atlanta NAACP. So, Mr. Griggs. Last but certainly not least, we have LaShondra Little. She serves as the voter education and outreach manager for the Fulton County Office of Registration and Elections. It's a role she's held since 2021. LaShondra has helped implement a plan to encourage education and engagement for all elections and has helped grow the ambassador program for Fulton County, which lets citizens host voter registration drives. LaShondra, thank you for joining us. So I'm gonna come right up here. So first, thank you guys I've talked with all three of you multiple times. We know each other pretty well. I want to make sure everybody else knew who you guys were and how important you are and pivotal in this election cycle. So my first question for you guys is, first and foremost, we already talked about some of the bills that have been implemented. We know that last presidential election in Georgia was decided by less than 12,000 votes. We have voter list maintenance procedures that are going to come up here pretty soon. There's a lot of things happening. Should Black folks in Atlanta Metro be concerned about their right to vote heading into November? Why or why not? Representative Mitchell, you can get it started.
Testing, yes. Should we be concerned? And the answer is absolutely. As I go around, and I'm sure some of you are hearing the same discussions, we tend to have from certain communities, some communities, less emphasis on what their vote, the impact that their vote will have. And I suggest to you that there's a war. You know, I used to feel a little differently when I was on the other side of policy making. I'm on this side, and I can tell you there's a concerted effort to keep some people away from the polls. I mean, it's a deliberate effort to do so, and it's always somewhat unsettling to see and hear some people that don't understand the true value that they have in their vote. So with this effort that is going on to keep certain communities from voting, we ought to be very, very concerned about it. If I may, Chauncey, just say here, I see we got a lot of Black women here in the audience, and I will tell you, Black women, not only in Georgia, across this nation, they're the number one demographic that is likely to go vote, Black women. You're doing a wonderful job of going to vote. Conversely, Black men are probably the least likely to go vote. And I'm not going to let you Black women off the hook. I'm blaming you Black women for the Black men not going to vote. Now, hear my thesis before you run me out of here. If you Black women would say to these men, you can't have my telephone number if you're not registered to vote. You want my number, write it on that little peach they give you when they vote. Let me see your voter registration card. Black men would vote at a record level. And this is what we need to happen going forward.
So first, thank you, Chauncey, and thank you, Capital B, for having us to have this robust conversation about voting. The short answer is yes, Black people in this state, and people of color in this state, should be worried about the surgical attempt to carve out and take away their right to vote. It's been happening since time immemorial in this state, but there hasn't been a renewal focus on this since 2015 to now. And then after the record turnout in 2020, they went back to the well and craft out SB 202, which is the voter suppression bill. They call it the voter integrity bill. I call it the voter suppression bill. That's why we sued the state of Georgia and are still in litigation for that. But then you have to talk about the racial gerrymandering that is occurring in this state, and now the unlimited voter challenges under the new laws. And so there's a concerted effort. I believe Supreme Court said in North Carolina there's a surgical attempt to disenfranchise. And so what we have to do is to overwhelm the ballot box. That's the only way we overcome this surgical attempt to take away our right to vote. Similar to what we did in 2020 and in 2021, and then turn back around in 2022. And I'm gonna push back a little bit on what Billy said. We do know the most engaged demographic to vote is black women at 90%. But brothers voted at 80% as well. So what we have to do is come together like we do for the electric slide, what we do for the wobble, what we do for all of the latest dances, and make sure we mobilize to the polls to make sure that bills like SB 202 and the newest ones that go into effect for this election are not successful, because the best way to defeat voter suppression is to overwhelm the ballot box. So we got to take everybody to the polls. We are marching to the polls. We are wobbling to the polls. We are electric sliding to the polls. Whatever the latest dance they're doing on TikTok, we're doing that to the polls, because we have to make sure we protect our right to vote.
Chandra, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say to this.
So one, you all heard I work for Fulton County. We're the hot spot, so I'm not gonna say much that's gonna have me in the news somewhere. But I will say from what I do and what my team strives to do is educate. And so our question is always, what about these laws? What about these laws? It doesn't matter what passes under the Gold Dome. My job is to make sure I'm educating the citizens on how no matter what is happening, this is the way you go vote. So if they say you can't vote at this location, okay, this is the location you can vote. You have to now have your ID, okay, I can help you if you don't have ID. I can get you a free voter identification card. And so for us, we try not to think about it in the partisan lens of how bills were passed, but more so of what are we going to do for Fulton County to still make sure we get people out to the vote, no matter what is passed under the Gold Dome. So yes, folks should be concerned, but that's because there's power in our vote. And if there was not power in our vote, we wouldn't get legislation after legislation, year after year, that continues to change the way in which we vote.
Speaking of which, we talked a little bit about redistricting. So for those that don't know, the old political maps that determine voter districts in Georgia were declared basically unconstitutional based on the Voting Rights Act provision, and were thrown out of court. These are maps. Georgia is a Republican-controlled legislature, and these were maps that were drawn up in the aftermath of 2020. I think they do it every 10 years? Yeah. So they had to redraw the maps to create some majority black districts for both U.S. Congress, state Senate, and the Georgia House. So there were a number of those districts were created, but it also meant that a lot of people, and then some of them I've talked to, have been voting in the same polling place their entire life. A lot of elderly black folks have been voting in the same place for 40 plus years. They had to go vote someplace else, and they weren't prepared for that even on primary election day on May 21st. So I mentioned to LaShondra earlier, so this question is for you. Talked to at least two folks at the C.T. Martin Rec Center and Auditorium in Adamsville who said they were having issues voting relating to redistricting and drop boxes. One elderly woman said she'd been voting in the same place her entire life but was turned away. We talked before about maybe she might have been offered a provisional ballot, and black folks are rightly concerned about voting provisional ballots because of 2020. So she may have decided, nah, I'm just gonna go vote wherever y'all tell me to go vote. Nevertheless, was turned away on the 21st because her district had been redrawn. She was rushing to get across town to cast her ballot. Another young woman said she was dropping off her mom's absentee ballot, but was told that the drop box at the location had been closed and that she had to go someplace else and that she may not make it before the polls closed. So she wasn't confident about that. My question, LaShondra, are these outlier scenarios have you seen an increase in this type of thing this election cycle?
Not necessarily an increase. I wouldn't say outlier. Again, it goes back to education. Because one, drop boxes have always been the last day of early voting. So that's the last day you could ever drop off a ballot if you were trying to put it in a drop box. And that was SB 202. So there were some changes with drop boxes. And of course in 2020, I think Fulton County had like 38 drop boxes all across the county. They were outside, accessible 24 hours a day. And so some people were still looking for that scenario. So again, that's why I said it goes back to education, because when SB 202 was passed, it changed to now you can only have one drop box per 100,000 active voters that you have to, so Fulton County has about 745,000 active voters, so now we only have 7 drop boxes. And then those 7 drop boxes no longer could be accessible 24/7. They're now inside of the early voting location and only accessible during early voting hours. And the last day always for drop boxes will be the Friday of early voting. Now on election day, if somebody is trying to turn in their ballot, they do have until 7 o'clock on election night, but they can only turn it in to one of our offices. So we have 4 locations in which people can turn in their ballots. Now the redistricting piece, by law, anybody that's redistricted, we have to mail out new precinct cards and mail out a redistricting card to let them know. Now granted, with the mailing system right now, that's the issue that is happening. So how do we combat that? And so for us, we are trying to make sure we get the word about. Call us, know before you go, because that's the biggest piece for most people. Because I was telling people all along in Fulton County, because people have been voting for David Scott 20 plus years. He's always been on their ballot. So we had a lot of people angry when they got to see their ballot and his name wasn't there. He was completely removed from Fulton County. And so there was a lot of confusion about that. And so that goes back to the whole, you gotta plan your vote. And I know people say, why do you say that? Because if you know before you get in there what's on your ballot, you won't have the issues, or you won't be upset or cussing out poll workers, which happens, because you already have looked and you know what you're doing and you know when you're going there. And I also say that too, because if something is wrong on your ballot, once you put it in that scanner, there is nothing we can do. Prior to you get to that scanner, if you notice something is wrong, somebody is missing off your ballot, if you get it to one of the election workers, we can go back and double check. We can go in the system and say, did you have the right ballot? If not, cancel out that ballot, give them a new one, we spoil that ballot and let them go and start the process over again. But what happens is most people go ahead and put them in the scanner, and then we'll hear later on the news, oh, well, I don't think this person was on my ballot, I had the wrong ballot. So that we have to make sure people understand, don't put it in, if you think something is wrong, do not put it in the scanner. And so even before I started working for elections, that happened to me with an election. It was a special election for District 39, Senate race, and they weren't on my ballot. And they was like, are you sure you got the right ballot? I said, you have the wrong person, because I'm the one person that's always gonna know who's on my ballot. And I had to talk to the election officials and make sure, and they had to go through the process and update. They had given me the card of just the general election. They didn't add in the special election when they saw my name pop up to see that I was in that district. And so we have to make sure people are vigilant to do that. Now, granted, not everybody is going to want to go that far and do all that, but we do have to make sure people understand, because of the different laws that have been passed and the different legislations that's out there, we have to make sure that people are being diligent and make sure they're looking up what's on their ballot prior to them going to the precinct.
Mr. Griggs, what are you? You're the president of the NAACP. You guys do voter engagement work. What are you hearing about Black folks having access to the ballot so far this election season during the primary season?
So we're hearing the same things, and it's not just Fulton County. We had an issue in Macon-Bibb, we had an issue in Henry County, we had an issue down in Coffee County, all over, with the ballots being incorrect because of the new redistricting lines. And so it's incumbent upon us as the NAACP to make sure we educate everybody to where the new lines are. We were one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit for redistricting to help draw 2 new majority African American districts, even though they got rid of the mixed districts. So they were putting race and partisanship in the same basket. So that's a whole nother argument. But what we are trying to do is to make sure people understand where they are registered to vote, where the new districts are, who their candidates are. That's why we always push people to print out early their sample ballots so they know who's on their sample ballot, so they can do their due diligence to learn about the candidates, learn about the amendments or the questions in the primary, and the amendments in the general election, and making sure we educate, because it's going to be different. With SB 202 and now the new bills that have passed, they are trying to create barriers. So we're talking about how many bubbles in the jar, literacy tests, poll tax, it just have a new name, voter purge, list maintenance, local election board takeovers. All these things are to make barriers more difficult for you accessing your rights. So we've seen it in Macon, we've seen it in Coffee County, we've seen it in Lowndes County. We fully expect we will see it in the metro area, because they know if they can shave off the margins, they can swing an election. And so we will have a robust election protection program that launches 1-866-OUR-VOTE. You have any issues with your ballot, have any issues with accessing your right to the franchise, call us. Our lawyers are on standby because we love to sue. So 1-866-OUR-VOTE. We've sued the Secretary of State 8 times, beat him 6 times. We have 3 pending litigations right now. We will be there to make sure we protect your right. But we also need y'all to go out and vote. And not just you, but take 10 other legal voters to the polls so we can make sure we overwhelm the ballot box and make sure that we elect people that speak to what Georgia really is about, and that's inclusivity and not exclusivity.
I want to make sure we're talking about also SB 189. We're running up on time, so we got about 5 minutes, guys, just to let you know, keep the answers a little shorter. So SB 189, as mentioned earlier, increases people's ability to do mass voter challenges in the wake of the judges ruling largely in favor of a conservative group, True the Vote, in a lawsuit brought by Fair Fight. One provision of the law requires homeless or unhoused people to list their county registrar as their residents to avoid having their voter eligibility challenged. We've seen in the last few years a surge in homelessness population, largely fueled by Black people and Black men in particular. So there's some concern around unhoused people having access to the ballot. Representative Mitchell, first, what are your thoughts on this bill and how it might impact our unhoused brothers and sisters, with the surging cost of housing in Georgia?
Well, certainly that's just another, as President Gerald just said, about the surgical procedure of trying to prevent us from voting. I will tell you, just to literally give you a very interesting fact, 2003 it was, the Secretary of State at that time was Kathy Thompson. She said we wanted to do early voting. And a brilliant legislator sponsored the bill for her. His name was Billy Mitchell. But anyway, and we had early voting in Georgia for the first time. It was 2 weeks. And we were actually nervous about it because, as Councilmember Lewis could tell you, we concentrated on Election Day. We had, and at that time, Republicans were going to the vote in absentee and early voting way more than Democrats were. And sure enough, we passed the bill, and the Republicans killed us in absentee and early voting. But along came the New Georgia Project, Stacey Abrams, and other groups. And guess what happened? Democrats started to catch on. Now, an amazing thing happened. The year after we passed the bill, Republicans took over the General Assembly, and they increased early voting from 2 weeks to about 6 weeks because they were killing us. And Democrats caught up, and guess what has happened ever since? Every election cycle, they've been reducing their early voting period. Same way with the drop boxes. Drop boxes were everywhere. Democrats were starting to use those drop boxes like nobody's business. Every legislative session, we've been decreasing the number of these drop boxes. So, same way with it used to be homeless could say, this is where I live, and that was good enough. Now we're making it more difficult for them to do so. And it's easier to get a permit to own a gun than it is to get registered to vote in this state. And so that's what this is all about.
Gerald, what is the NAACP doing to help make sure unhoused folks are eligible to vote and can have access to the ballot?
Well, one of the things we've been doing since COVID is food delivery. So we are actually every month out with our unhoused population throughout the metro Atlanta area and in other locations throughout the state. And so as we're out with them, we are registering them and making sure they are registered with the Secretary of State or that local election board there. And so that's one of the things we're doing. But like Representative Mitchell just said, there's an attempt at every turn to disenfranchise, and it's absurd that you would try to disenfranchise the most vulnerable population, which is the unhoused population. So we've been intentional with our partners like New Georgia Project and others, and Black Voters Matter and the NAACP, to making sure we register as many as we possibly can. But the one thing about Georgia's not really a registration issue. The issue is mobilization. And so we're going to be key on mobilizing mobilizing and mobilizing, because we gotta get the registered voters. I believe Georgia's at 90% registration. We gotta get to 60 to 70 to 80% turnout, and then we'll get the results that we are looking for. So we're registering, and then we're gonna mobilize.
I'm going to open it up for Q&A. Does anybody have a question for any of our panelists?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jovan Page. I'm from the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, Power and Leadership Portfolio Program Officer. So thank you for the insight. Thank you all for having this forum. One of the things I want to talk about and address as a funder is about how the propensity to drive people towards the poll typically typifies what people define as democracy, but it's typically only when we have an election of the magnitude that's the Senate, the House of Representatives, or the President. And there's elections that happen every year. So can you all talk about how important it is from a civic engagement perspective, civic journalism, to really educate people on the importance of voting every single year, not just so they're educated on all the practices and all of the changes that exist, but also so they can understand things like the census actually have more impact in the gravity of what exactly we need to have as a community.
Thank you for that question, and that's one of the reasons why we do what we do year-round with the NAACP through our Political Action Committee. We make sure that we mobilize voters, not just in important elections like the presidential election, but the off-year elections, which are municipal elections, and of course, every year with the State House, the State Senate, all of the county commission races, the DA races, the sheriff's races, all those races. And it's important that funders like yourself get in touch with the grassroots organizers like the NAACP, like Black Voters Matter, like New Georgia Project, who do this civic engagement every year. So thank you for the question. In Georgia, we are laser focused on every election and not just the presidential election, which is why you saw in 2022 and 2021 historic turnout in an off-year election. And so we are working on that, and we're one of the grassroots organizations that do that every year.
I will tell you, but Johnson, if I may, prior to being in the legislature, I was on my local city council, and I would tell you that our federal government, their policy making is like a cruise ship. They need a lot of time and space to change directions. The state legislature is just a little bit better than that. Need a lot of time and space, but your local city council and commissions, I've been to meetings where 5, 6, 7 people get up and complain about something, and they change that policy at night. And so that just tells you the importance of making sure that you get engaged locally as well as federal.
And I would also say work with your local county election boards, because prior to 2020, my position didn't exist. And they saw a need after the 2020 election that folks needed to be educated. And so they created the voter education and outreach and people come back to my division often trying to give me fight, like, because they don't want people to be educated. So we work with the schools. You see my team is here with me today. If people need any information about the elections, we'll be happy to give you that information. And we're trying to forge a relationship with some of we work well with NAACP. I have several of them as deputy registers. But what we come across sometimes is some of them feel like they're in competition with us. And I was like, we all working together, because everybody you register, we gotta process it. And we just want to make sure you're doing it right, so these people won't be rejected or they won't be challenged. And so start working with your local election board as well, because everybody doesn't have this. So there are several people who contact me all the time saying, how can you help me get this in my county? Well, one, I'm not going to help you set this up for free. But if other people are letting, if you go to your county you see is missing and say there's a need for voter education, stay on them so they can create this as well for your particular local election board as well.
Hello, my name is Takisi Shields with Mothers Against Gang Violence, and the question I have is, I work with families of returning citizens, and I would like to know what advice, because I know we're talking about balance, but understanding when their probation is up, when their parole is up, what is the process of them having a voice and knowing that their voices are respectfully heard and that you have the rights to go to the polls? So what advice do you give to these individuals that feel like I never had a chance, but this is my chance now and I'm going to utilize it?
Yeah, so as you know, people that are returning citizens, once they're off of parole and probation, can register and vote. And one of the things we do at the NAACP through our Criminal Justice Committee as well as our Political Action Committee is for the individuals that are in pretrial detention, like the local jails. We go and make sure that they are registered, and in certain counties, we are trying to get a polling precinct in the county facility, because many of them have not been convicted of anything, and so they have all of their civil rights, including their right to vote. On the back end of that, the returning citizen, it depends on which county they are in, because our units are divided up mostly by county. So I can tell you all of the metro counties try to do a good job with the returning citizens once they're off of parole and off of probation, making sure they're registered and get access, return access back to be able to vote. So that's what we're doing.
So I will say, because I had this conversation with our solicitor this year, there are a lot of different organizations and groups that are working with them who are saying that it's automatic. That they're like, once they are off, they complete their restitution, all of that, then they automatically get their right back. They do get their right back, but it's not automatic. So what happens, and so that's the piece that's been missing, because they are thinking that they're already registered back to vote again. So what happens is Secretary of State sends us a list of anyone who's on that list. We have to cancel their registration. And so once your registration is canceled, the only way for you to be registered again is to start the process all over. And so that's what we want to get out, is with those of you when you're working with them, making sure they understand there's a step. Yes, you get your rights back, but you have to take that extra step and fill out the voter registration application again.
There's legislation to make it automatic, but of course we get we have to fight through that process. The legislature is going to have to change a little bit, but at least we're not, as there's a minority of states that once you're convicted of a crime, you never, ever get the opportunity to vote again. And I believe that is unconstitutional. We need to fight those kinds of things. I'm almost at the point where I'm going to say LeBron is the GOAT. I'm almost there. Only because in Florida they changed it so that you could vote again. It was once you were convicted as a felon, you could not vote again. The legislature changed it, and then the conservative legislature said, but you had to pay your fines. And some of these folks had exorbitant fines and still couldn't vote, and LeBron James stepped in and started writing checks. And I think that's good, but we're not that bad, and we're going to get to the point where it should be automatic.
So shout out to LeBron, shout out to the Lakers and Cleveland.
I mean, he could go with social activism, but there's only one go. Shout out to Mike.
You know, I thank you, LeBron, for your efforts and appreciate your social justice advocacy. Guys, I'm being told we got to cut for time. If anybody else has questions, we have resources in the back. Folks at the table from New Georgia Project, from Fulton County, and other organizations that can give you information on making sure that your rights are protected. I want to thank my guests for joining me and for putting up with my phone calls and texts at any time of the day and night, all year long. And appreciate you guys for joining us, and we're going to move on to our next panel.